Hey everybody, Fizz here. This is gonna be my first real, like, actual YouTube video. So if it's a little bit scuffed or I ramble a little bit, forgive me. But feel free to give me criticism on it so I can do this better. Anyway, in this video, I wanted to talk about kind of my take on the current like build viability versus like build diversity disconnect that we were kind of seeing Chris Wilson in the community and multiple different streamers having amongst each other. So originally Chris Wilson on the interview podcast he had on Bay Class, Tarky Cat brought up like build diversity in the game being down, and Chris kind of refuted that point and said, no, build diversity is not down. It's actually up. You're wrong. And whatever. Okay, so Zizrin came up with the concept of, hey, maybe it's not build diversity that's down. Maybe it's build viability that's down. He posed that argument to Chris, and Chris once again was like, no, actually, the children are wrong. Try harder, make viable builds are out there. However, when I was watching that particular section of the podcast between Chris, Mathel, and Ziz, it kind of felt like Ziz and Chris and Mathel were all kind of like coming from different angles, which they should be, but they were all talking about different things at the same time. And I think a lot of that is because what viability is and what like what is actually viable is like such a hard to define term in a game like PoE. Because like we've all seen Darky kill Cirrus with lightning tendrils, you know what I mean? Like technically everything is viable if you use the definition of viable means you can do all the content in the game, right? Technically pretty much everything in the game is viable. So when everything is technically viable, you have everyone creating their own rules on what is actually viable. Everyone sets their own goalposts on what is and isn't an acceptable skill in relation to viability, right? So I kind of want to break down what my thought process is on this, and I drew this little handy diagram here in MS Paint. This took me actually like 10 minutes to make. So don't read in too much to this. This is just a kind of visual representation of what I'm trying to explain. The numbers, just pulled numbers out of my ass. The builds, ignore them. Full disclaimer, I'm like an HCSSF only player. 99.9% of my time in PoE is playing HCSSF. So a lot of the builds I'm talking about, stuff like that, that's the kind of like perspective on the view, perspective on the game that I have. So if I say something and it seems whack as fuck to you, that's probably why. I don't know a whole lot about softcore meta and stuff like that. So just a disclaimer. If you don't agree on like the build placements or stuff like that, none of it's actually important. What's important is kind of like the overarching theme that I'm trying to like portray with this little diagram. So what is this diagram, right? Okay, so first off, we have the meta, right? The meta is a small subset of builds at the top of this diagram. And these are builds that are 100% plus effective, plus being like crazy broken shit, right? 100% plus effective at clearing content in the game. These are going to be things like Spectral Shield Throw, Forbidden Right Totems, Specters, etc., stuff like that. We all know what the meta is, right? Or the current meta, at least, right? The perceived meta. These are the strongest things, and typically these are the smallest subset of skills in the game. It's usually only a very small handful of skills that are just like meta, because inherently meta is not going to be a lot of things, right? Next up, we have a little bit more of an interesting category that should be a little bit bigger. On average, this is 70 to 80% effective skills. And the effectiveness is all relative to the meta skills, right? So these skills are 70 to 80% roughly. Again, the numbers, don't take them too seriously. It's just a representation. 70 to 80% effective relative to the meta skills. These are going to be things like Lightning Strike, Cyclone, Toxic Rain, Eye of Winter, Dawn Blow, etc. Again, this is from an HCSSF perspective. If you're playing Trade and you're like, oh my god, Lightning Strike's broken as fuck, what are you talking about? The builds aren't super important. This is just kind of like the HCSSF perspective I see on my current view of certain builds in the game, right? And these slightly less effective builds, why are they less effective? They might require a little bit more gear to get going, i.e. Lightning Strike, Eye of Winter, maybe, stuff like that. Or they may cap out a little bit sooner than meta builds. Something like Dawn Blow, at least in SSF, is going to cap out sooner than, you know, like Spectres will, or Forbidden Right Totems, for example. Like, bossing on that build is kind of difficult in HCSSF. Next, we have the big Sag category. And honestly, you could have a few smaller categories in here of like 60 to 70% skills that are like viable, but I just didn't want to put viability in this diagram because I don't want to have to argue that. So these are 60, 70% effective skills, not viable with an asterisk, right? Flame Wall, my Lacerate, my Spell Slinger, my Slams, my Scourge Arrow, Ignite, Heavy Strike, Bladefall, Blade Blast, Summon Reaper because it has a 50% chance to bleed, but is a bleed minion. Okay, so things like this. These are not viable skills on this diagram, right? And the reason the asterisk there is because actually I'm pretty confident that every single skill here can do everything in the game, right? They should be completely fine for it, assuming enough currency, time, investment, etc. Now, the problem lies and what my actual idea of why no one can agree on any of this is because once you get below a certain effectiveness relative to the meta skills, think of it as like a little weight things. You have a weight on each side, right? Like a scale. On this side, you have, I want to play this because it's fun. And on this side, you want to, it's going to be like, but I could just play a skill that will do this job better, right? And in the 70 to 80% effective range, the fun side is, I guess, we'll put them like pillars, right? The fun side's up here, and I could just play something else is down here, right? Because the fun outweighs the kind of like feeling of handicapping yourself by playing this skill that isn't as good as something else that's similar to it, right? But as you move down this effective list relative to the meta, this starts to shift where like your desire to play this skill starts to slowly get outweighed by that feeling of handicapping yourself for playing it, right? You could do all content in the game on Lacerate, but the whole time you're playing Lacerate, you're going to be thinking, man, Shield Crush does literally everything this skill does, but better and easier, and it will probably be more fun to play because it's so low relative to Shield Crush, right? Because if you're up here in the slightly off meta category, and you're like, damn, dude, Spectral Shield throws better than Lightning Strike. But Lightning Strike's still pretty freaking good, and I can do everything on this, and I'm comfortable, right? That's the difference. The lower you get here, the more effort a build takes to make work. Again, this is all perceptions. I'm not arguing the necessary viability of these skills. Just the perception that these skills take to work will inherently make people see it as less viable. Okay? So I do personally inherently believe that the more difficult a game becomes, the less forgiving it becomes, the more this graph squishes upwards, right? And when I say squishes upwards, I mean this red category gets bigger, the orange and the blue get relatively smaller, right? And why is that? I think when you have, and this point has been argued before by other people, but I'm just going to bring it up in this video anyway. But when you have a large subset of skills that are on this little teetering line, right? There may be 70% effective, 71% effective. Again, ignore the numbers. It's just an example, right? But they're teetering on this line. When you make the game harder and this giant red block gets moved up slightly, right? Every build that was kind of on the border right here falls down into this category where people just write it off. This build's not good, right? I can't play this. This feels bad to play, etc. Because a lot of this is based off of a feeling, which is why I think the statistics don't line up with certain people's arguments and stuff like that. Because it's just how people feel. And it's really hard to quantify game feel through just raw numbers, right? And the amount of builds that are teetering on this line, obviously PoE is a massive game. Shit tons of builds are on this little borderline here, right? Especially in the current state of the game. Whereas you can look in the past, and again, let me iterate one final time here. I am not arguing build diversity or viability in this graph. It's just for the sake of argument. Don't pay attention to the numbers too much, right? You could argue that in Ritual League, when a lot of people say the game was at its best or whatever, right? This line might have been somewhere like around here, right? Or in Harvest League, people say they want to play Harvest. This line was maybe around here, where there's way more stuff in the game that feels way better to play, if that makes sense, right? Now, I'm not saying that this is actually how the viability was, but in players' perception, this is how the game was. And then when you have massive nerf leagues, oh, there goes those builds. Oh, they're gone. We can't play those anymore. Oh, there goes those builds. They're not gone. We can't play anymore. And thus, oh my God, there's no build diversity. Nothing's viable anymore. What happened? Not my PoE, stuff like this. And now we have this little tiny handful of stuff that people perceive. Again, perception is the key thing here. They perceive are the only good builds, the only playable builds, build diversity, blah, 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 blah. This is kind of like what I see when I see everyone arguing all these different things. I'm not saying it's necessarily right, but this is just kind of my opinion after listening to everyone's arguments and trying to like understand why no one can agree on anything. Especially I started thinking about this a lot, like I said, after the Ziz Mathel Chris discussion, because all three of them were talking, but it felt like they were talking about completely different things. And this is just kind of why I think that is. I think this is why they were all arguing completely different things, because everything in this game, if you are ever going to argue viability, is going to be based completely off of a person's own perceptions or feelings of what viable is and how they like to play the game, and where their specific personal measurements are for like how much they're willing to put into a build, right? Or like what standards a build needs to meet, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, that's my TED talk on build diversity and build viability. If you have any criticisms for me, any feedback, please let me know. This is the first time I've done anything like this. So if you like it, please let me know. Any suggestions for improvement, also please let me know. I want these to be as good as possible. So hopefully this will be the first of many. Thank you very much. If you stuck till the end, you listen to everything. Please don't flame me in the comments for saying your favorite skill sucks, or that your favorite skill is good and you think it's bad now. It was all for the sake of argument. Yeah, I'm supposed to plug things here, right? Like the video, subscribe to things, Twitch, TikTok, what else is there? There's Twitter. Those things exist. Those will be down below. Yeah, do those things if you want to, or not. I'm not your mom. Anyway, thanks guys. I'm gonna end the video here. Bye.